Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Today we have taken up daily edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 23rd of August 2021. The articles which we are going to cover today have been displayed on your screen, and let us now begin the discussion. So the first article which we have taken for today's discussion, Breaking the Logjam, Handing Over the Baton, appears on page number 6 as a lead editorial. This article gives reference to the recent Supreme Court Collegium recommendation of selecting 9 people as judge of Supreme Court. With the appointment of so many judges by the President of India, all the 9 vacancies in the Supreme Court will be filled up. And so the Supreme Court is likely to function in almost full capacity, which is very rare. And this brings us to the issue of judicial appointments. The author gives reference to 3 judges' cases in this discussion and also talks about need for transparency in the appointment to the higher judiciary. Now, if you look into the syllabus of GS paper 2, structure, organization and functioning of executive and judiciary is a part of your syllabus. And one of the important ways through which an organization can function efficiently is the way appointments are made. And especially in case of judiciary, the way people are appointed is crucial for determining the independence of judiciary. And so in this regard, we are going to understand the constitutional provision, the genesis of 3 judges case which lies in Keshwanand Bharti case, what challenges collegium system faces, and what is the way forward. Let us now begin the discussion. Now, whenever we talk about judicial and higher judicial appointments or appointment to these constitutional posts, why are we so worried about these appointments? Now, we are worried about these appointments because the way these judges are appointed decides the independence of the judiciary. Now, if you've gone through even the most basic of the text of NCERT, you know the Constitution of India has taken a great care to ensure the independence of judiciary. Let us know in the comment section what are some of the provisions through which the Constitution has ensured the independence of judiciary. Now, why is independence of judiciary so important? Now, independence of judiciary, especially in a democracy like India, is very, very important. Because first and foremost, you need to maintain public confidence in the judiciary. That public confidence will come only when judiciary will be seen as independent. Then, if you want to uphold rule of law, you have to be independent, because more often than not, threats to rule of law come from government. And then, if you want to protect individual rights, fundamental rights and liberties, which again are generally threatened by the government and its actions, you will have to be independent. An appointment is one of the ways through which either the independence can be gained or it can be lost if we are talking about judiciary. Because if the appointment procedure is dominated by the government or executive, many people say that judiciary, higher judiciary, will also become like another ministry or an attaché of a government. And so that is why the first article which deals with judiciary, higher judiciary, Article 124 also talks about the appointment to the higher judiciary in the Supreme Court. So Article 124 states that President shall make Supreme Court judges appointments after consulting the Chief Justice of India and other Supreme Court and High Court judges as he considers necessary. So, the appointment shall be made by the President of India. But it is mandatory for the President to consult the Chief Justice of India for appointment as a Supreme Court judge, as well as other Supreme Court and High Court judges as he or she may think fit. Similarly, for the appointment to the High Court, the appointment is again made by President, but in this case, the consultation is done or is mandatory as far as Chief Justice of India is concerned, but then you will have Governor and Chief Justice of High Court concerned. So now you can see that the Constitution has clearly given the power to the President as far as appointment is concerned. But President has to consult Chief Justice of India. So what does this consultation means? And how far the consultation done with the Chief Justice of India is mandatory for the President or the government is what has led to a lot of legal debate. Because Article 74 says that President of India shall act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. It will be unconstitutional for the President to not act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. But Article 124 says that the Supreme Court judges will be appointed by the President after consultation with Chief Justice of India. And so here is what you have, the genesis of a problem of appointment to the higher judiciary. So now everyone can see that the collegium system through which the higher judiciary is appointed is nowhere mentioned in the Constitution of India. And so the aspirants, especially those who are in their initial phases of preparation, are often confused as to where this collegium system has come into play. And for that, we will have to go into the history a little bit. I will just take 3 to 4 minutes to explain that. And the genesis of collegium system can be traced back to Keshwanand Bharti case, which was a landmark judgment which was given by a very narrow margin of 7:6, where the Supreme Court delivered its historic verdict which established the doctrine of basic structure to the Constitution of India, which basically means principles and values that cannot be altered by any act of legislature or executive. So of course the verdict was not well received by the government of the day, headed by Indira Gandhi, which viewed it as curtailing the power of the parliament and the government. And so of course there was bound to be a retaliation. And so what followed was a series of unprecedented events. On April 26, 1973, one of the judges who dissented in the Keshwanand Bharti case, Justice A.N. Ray, the person who was against the basic structure doctrine, was promoted to the position of Chief Justice of India. But he was not the senior most judge, because so far the tradition was that the senior most judge of the Supreme Court will automatically become the Chief Justice of India. So his elevation was made possible by superseding 3 more senior judges, all those 3 judges who were in the favor of basic structure of the Constitution. This was a blatant attack on judicial independence by the executive. And so from there, what took off as a legal battle has culminated into 3 judges' case. And these 3 judges' cases have subsequently restored the independence of the judiciary as far as appointment process is concerned. We will of course reflect upon the demerits of collegium system, but let's just quickly go through the 3 judges' cases. Before the 3 judges case, in 1974, Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab, Supreme Court held that approval of Chief Justice of India is must in appointing judges of High Court and Supreme Court. Then in 1981, first judges case or SP Gupta case, Supreme Court ruled that the recommendation made by CJI to the President can be refused for cogent reasons, thereby giving greater say to executive. So now you can see it's all about the interpretation of the consultation. So in 1974, Supreme Court says that consultation means mandatory obligation. In 1981, Supreme Court says that consultation is not binding. Then in 1993, in second judge's case, the Supreme Court held that Chief Justice of India only need to consult 2 senior most judges over judicial appointments and transfers. However, an objection raised by executive on appointment, collegium may or may not change their recommendation, which is binding on executive. So now you can see that consultation in second judge's case is now starting to mean boundation. Of course, there is a scope of reconsideration, but after reconsidering, if collegium says the same thing, recommends the same name, executive has to follow it. Then in 1998, under third judge's judgment, the Supreme Court ruled that CJI should consult with 4 senior most Supreme Court judges to form his opinion on judicial appointments and transfers. The recommendation of the Chief Justice of India would be binding on the executive. So the genesis of collegium system can be traced to the second judge's cases, which interpreted the word consultation as concurrence, which was then restated by the third judge's cases. Of course, there were some changes which were made in the way the Chief Justice of India is going to consult the senior most judges, but overall, it has restored the same thing. Now, this became a big problem for the government and the executive, because now they lost almost all the say in the appointment to the higher judiciary. And so to undo that, they came up with National Judicial Appointment Commission and the constitutional amendment, which has again been rejected by the Supreme Court. And so right now the procedure is the same as given in the third judge's case and memorandum of procedure, which was signed a few years ago. So as the things stand today, all the appointments to higher judiciary are being done by a collegium of higher judiciary judges. And there is a lot of problem in that. The problem is just not limited to the constitutionality of the provision, but it also deals with merit, corruption, and nepotism as well. Constitutionality, because when the Constituent Assembly debates were going on, The Assembly deliberately rejected the proposal to vest the Chief Justice with the veto power over appointments. And so something which was debated in the Constitutional Assembly and was rejected, how can it later on become the part of our legal system? Then the next set of problem comes from Article 74, as I have alluded initially. Because Article 74 demands the President to act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. Article 124 says that President is going to consult Chief Justice of India. The collegial system demands the concurrence of the President with or without aid and advice of Council of Ministers. And so this goes against the basic structure, which is the parliamentary democracy, which requires the President to act only and only on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. Now, Council of Ministers may advise against the consultation of CJI, but that doesn't matter. And so according to 214th Law Commission of India, collegium is a clear violation of Article 74. Then comes the issue of undemocratic nature of the collegium system itself. Because of the way collegium system has operated in past 20 years, it has been very non-transparent and closed to outsiders. And no system of checks and balances have existed, which are an essential part of democracy, and especially for appointments to higher judiciary. Of course, since last 2-3 years, Supreme Court has opened up its collegium system a little bit, but not to the extent which is expected of an institution of such a high dignity. Then there have been numerous cases where people with better qualification and better track records have been sidelined to make way for someone less qualified due to seniority. And so there is a case of ruling over of merit over seniority. Then finally, you have Uncle Judges syndrome. Now these are not my words, but used by Law Commission in its 230th report, which said that nepotism, corruption and personal patronage is prevalent in functioning of the collegium system. Recently, Justice R.M. Lodha made a comment where he said every third High Court judge is an uncle. It is found that within the High Court, relatives are practicing law at the same place. Most of the judges and advocates have blood relation between them. And this is a very serious issue as far as the independence of higher judiciary is concerned. But it's not like higher judiciary has not taken any step. Supreme Court has made way for proceedings of collegium system to be kept in public domain. And this was very correct move and very welcome move. It was an obligation and a moral obligation on higher judiciary to do so. Especially after it struck down the NJAC judgment, it basically became incumbent upon the higher judiciary to do so. Then of course the proactive disclosure by judiciary is in sync with the Right to Information Act as well. Now as far as openness as a value of GS paper 4 is concerned, it not only means openness in the functioning of the executive arm of the state, but also in the judicial apparatus, including judicial appointments and transfers. And finally, the right to know of the citizens. The step strengthens democratic process and fundamental rights of freedom of speech as the right to know as an inherent part of the Constitution, which the secretive collegium system directly violates. So these are the steps which the judiciary has taken, which is very welcome. But now what can be the future course of action? So the first step would be legalizing the collegium system by the government. Law Commission has already recommended that Parliament should pass a law. Now this law should not be exactly the same as the collegium system being followed. It should have an element of transparency, but at the same time, it should ensure primacy of the judiciary in the judicial appointment. Then this new system should ensure independence, accommodate the federal concept of diversity, demonstrate professional competence and integrity. It should also have strict criteria for appointment as a judge of higher judiciary. Eligibility criteria to judge the performance and suitability must be formulated objectively and must be made public. So these are some of the recommendations which will go a long way in ensuring that not only the judiciary is independent, but also the continuous struggle which is going on between judiciary and executive can be put to an end. Let us now move on to the next article. 387 Moplah martyrs to be removed from dictionary appears on page number 5. Now these pages of newspapers, that is page number 2, 3, 4, 5, just before the editorial, generally cover regional news. And it's because of the news like this that we generally recommend students to do go through, at least skim through these pages, because they cover some of the very important parts of the syllabus. For example, in this case, Moplah rebellion. which will directly map with your GS Paper 1 syllabus for mains examination under the freedom struggle, its various stages and important contributions from different parts of the country. Also, from the perspective of prelims examination, Moplah rebellion is very, very important. And so a 3-member panel which reviewed the entries in the 5th volume of dictionary brought out by Indian Council of Historical Research ICHR is understood to have recommended the deletion, as it felt that 1921 rebellion was never a part of independence struggle and was a fundamentalist movement focused on religious conversions. And it's because of the news like this, history often becomes a part of current affairs. Now, there were hundreds of rebellions during the times of British, and 50 of them at least have been given in the textbooks which you are referring to. But from the perspective of prelims and mains this year, now Malabar rebellion has become more important as compared to other. And so we are going to reflect upon Malabar rebellion and why ICHR has taken this step. So starting with Malabar rebellion itself, which happened in the year of 1921 and went up till 1922 when they were brutally suppressed. It happened in the Malabar region of Kerala, and so the name Malabar Rebellion or often Moplah Rebellion, because of the main contributors who belong to the Moplah or Moplah community of Malabar region. Although it started as a resistance against the British colonial rule in Malabar region of Kerala, it went on to take a very, very communal color, mainly targeting Hindus of the region. Now, in order to understand the whole context of the rebellion, you will have to first understand the system of land ownership in Malabar region. Just like any other place or any other region at that point of time in our country, the rural society of Malabar was also divided into 2 parts. The Janmis, consisting mainly of Nambudiri Brahmins and Nayar chieftains, who were the land owning class, and they are of course Hindus. And on the other hand, the people who worked on the fields, also known as Verum Patrakar, among which the Moplah Muslims were the dominating community. So now you can see the assets in a region are divided into 2 classes, land owning classes and the people who are working on those lands. But this division extends also to religion, because the land owning class is mainly Hindus and the people who are working on those fields are mainly Muslims, mainly cultivators. Now the peasants were given Verum Pattam. Now these are important terms, they can be directly asked in your prelims examination. Now Verum Pattam simply means a simple lease of the land that was typically valid for 1 year only, and it had to be renewed every year. So that was the system before British entered into this territory. Once they entered, and just like any other territory, they brought their own tenancy law, which tremendously favored Genoese. So the terms and conditions of the relationship between Genoese and Moplah were already very, very favored and biased against the Moplahs. But as soon as the new tenancy law came, it became more biased, and Genoese became more dominant in the region, depriving peasants of most of the rights. Now this gave rise to a lot of resentment amongst the peasants, mainly belonging to Moplah community, which were Muslims, against their direct rulers or Hindus or Genoese, and against the Britishers who brought this new law. And this is, we are talking about the second decade of 20th century, beginning 1920s. Now at the same time, just a matter of coincidence, that Khilafat agitation was also picking up pace, which was a pan-Islamist political protest campaign launched by Muslims of British India. In case of India, it was led by Shaukat Ali, Maulana Muhammad Jauhar, Hakim Ajmal Khan, to restore the Khalifa of the Ottoman Caliphate, and that was targeted mainly against the Britishers. Now if you recall, at the same time, non-cooperation movement was also picking up pace. And Gandhiji wanted to harness not just the Hindus, rural, urban, he wanted to include everyone against the British. And so he saw the resentment of Moplah community against the Britishers as an opportunity to bring them along as far as the movement against the Britishers was concerned. So 3 forces combined: already existing frustration of Moplah community against the Britishers. Then, since they were Muslims, it was very natural for them to be associated with the Khilafat cause, and at the same time, Khilafat and NCM were already cooperating, so it became very natural for the nationalist leaders to encourage Moplah to revolt against the Britishers. And so finally rebellion took place. Initially it concentrated against the Britishers. Most of the Britishers in that territory were either defeated or they were killed, but once the British leadership and the government was gone for some time, the anger and the wrath was then concentrated against the Hindus, because there was a grave resentment against the Genovese as well, who were kind of zamindars at that place. So once the Mapilas had destroyed the Britishers, they focused on the Hindus. Around thousands of Hindus and hundreds of temples were destroyed in the months that followed up this rebellion. Later on, rebellion died down because of the very brutal suppression by Britishers, and this is also considered as one of the reasons why Moplahs never participated in any anti-British movement henceforth, because of the brutal suppression. Nonetheless, this is what Moplah rebellion was. Of course, this is Daily News Simplified. We cannot make it a static history class, but this is more than sufficient for you from the perspective of both mains as well as prelims examination. So now Indian Council of Historical Research has recommended the deletion of Moplah rebellion leaders, because in their research they have found out that this movement was not really nationalist in nature. It was mainly a fundamentalist rebellion which was focused on religion conversion. The rebellion was an attempt to establish caliphate. They cite examples from the history that the leaders of the Moplah rebellion sought to restore Sharia court in the areas which they got free from the British for some time. And while the rebellion was going on, while they were revolting against the British, they did not raise any nationalist slogans. And so it cannot be categorized really as a nationalist movement or even a part of nationalist movement. It was a communal movement according to ICHR. And so they have recommended the deletion of the names of these leaders from the nationalist leaders list. So as all of us know that history is always open for reinterpretation. We should always open our minds and keep the new ideas flowing into our minds. But from the perspective of civil services examination, what is important is Moplah rebellion, what were the causes of Moplah rebellion, and that's it. Let us now move on to the next news. This next article for discussion appears on page number 7, focusing on diseases sidelined by COVID-19. And it says that strengthening the primary healthcare system will help tackle the burden of non-communicable diseases, because nearly 71% of all deaths worldwide occur due to non-communicable diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases. We know that a lot of these diseases are totally preventable, especially if changes in the lifestyle are made. But that change has to be very timely. And so it is time for India to focus on this new epidemic, which is non-communicable diseases. Now we know that issues related to health and education form an important part of GS Paper 2 syllabus. Also from the perspective of essay, it is very important. Now in this regard, we already had this discussion 3 months ago, which was about a chapter dedicated to health in the economic survey. So we are going to listen to the same discussion. It discusses all the issues of India's health sector, laying special emphasis on non-communicable diseases. So we all know that recent COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the importance of the healthcare sector and its linkage with other key sectors of the economy. And we know that health of a nation depends critically on its citizens having access to an equitable, affordable, and accountable healthcare system. Better health is directly reflected in the better economic growth of a country through labor productivity, declined economic burden of illness. So for example, a World Health Organization report has said that increasing life expectancy from 50 to 70 years could raise the economic growth by 1.4 percentage points per year. So these are just the economic reasons for improving the health of the economy. Of course, because this is an economic survey. But the better health of each and every individual is an end in itself and not a means to achieve something. And so a whole chapter of economic survey is dedicated to current state of affairs of India's healthcare. And it has highlighted the current issues which are plaguing India's healthcare system. And let us understand them one by one. First and foremost is, of course, India's health outcomes are very poor. As you can see, despite improvements in maternal mortality and infant mortality rate, India still needs to improve significantly on these matrices. Countries such as China, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Cambodia have improved much more in the same period of time than India. And these are just few of the indicators which we have taken. Then, India is still marred by the fact that the access to the health services and its utilization is very low in India. So hospitalization rates in India are 3 to 4%, which are among the lowest in the world. Now the same statistics for a middle income country is about 8 to 9%, and for OECD countries it is about 15 to 17%. The India is observing very high out of pocket expenditures. And as you can see in the figure, India has one of the highest levels of out-of-pocket expenditure in the world. If you compare, India is placed right beside Bangladesh, whereas other countries which are emerging economies, for example China and Thailand, there the amount of money which people have to shell out for hospitalization and other medical purposes is very low, and that is mainly because of low budgetary allocations for healthcare, or in other words, low public spending in health systems. We know that health is a state subject in India. And if you look at India's overall state-wise distribution of spending on healthcare, it varies drastically. And so there is a vast amount of disparity in the overall spending across India. And so that is reflected in the out-of-pocket expenditure of people belonging to various states as well. So as you can see on your screen, this graph denotes on y-axis the out-of-pocket expenditure and on the x-axis per capita state health expenditure. And so if you see, the states like Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram spend a lot of amount on health. And so that is why the out-of-pocket expenditure in these states are very low. Then we have a problem of very low human resource for health, because health status of any country crucially depends on the available health infrastructure in general and human resource for health in particular. And again, just like low budgetary allocation for healthcare is dependent on the state efforts, the low human resource for health has also a state bias in it. And so the diagram which you see on your screen shows that only Kerala is a state which has adequate amount of human resource for health. Rest each and every state can be categorized into less than adequate density and less than minimum density, and most of the states in India have less than minimum density of human resource in our country. And so this also, being a state subject, has a disparity which can be explained from the point of view of state efforts. And then finally, we have a problem of unregulated private sector in healthcare, which is marked by high market failure. Now, private healthcare is important because while the share of public institutions has increased both in the number of hospitals as well as number of outpatient cares, the private sector dominates in total healthcare provision in India. And around 74% of outpatient care and 65% of overall hospitalization care is being provided through the private sector in urban India. And if you compare the cost of treatment between public and private sector for the same kind of disease, as you can see on the screen, there is a vast difference. And if you plot the same data on a state-wise and a city-wise manner, there is also a stark difference. And so that is why there is a need for a regulation. So these are the major issues plaguing our health sector. And so what is a saliency bias? Now, saliency bias is the bias of the policymakers to design the future course of action based on a recent phenomena. And so recent phenomena, which is a communicable disease, and the pandemic of this level is unlikely to strike within few years or maybe decades. And if we are able to address these issues highlighted in the economic survey, we will be better prepared to handle even these kinds of pandemic. But as the country is going through demographic transitions, there are few trends which are clearly visible, and that is the proportion of communicable and non-communicable diseases are changing in our society. So what you see on the screen is a percentage of all deaths plotted against the number of years. And so this line in the red is the number of deaths caused due to communicable maternal, neonatal and nutritional diseases. And this line in black color or dark brown color shows the number of deaths caused due to non-communicable diseases, and you can see by 2020 this forms the major share of overall deaths. And so the focus of health system of India needs to focus on non-communicable diseases, because if you leave 2020 aside, this is going to cause around 60% of overall deaths in India in future, and this is increasing. And if you break down the deaths caused due to each and every disease, if you look in 2019, the number one killer was heart disease. That has retained its position of number one. But in 2009, the disease which killed most number of people after heart disease was diarrheal disease, which is related to sanitation and infection, which is kind of communicable, has dropped down to the fourth number. Similarly, neonatal disorders have dropped down to fifth level, whereas COPD and deaths due to stroke have risen to 2, 3. So if you look, all top 3 killers are non-communicable in nature. And so that is why the economic survey lays very high emphasis on increasing public spending on health from 1% to at least 2.5% of the GDP. Increasing government spending on health has direct impact on life expectancy. And so these dots which you see on your screen are countries. And so higher the public expenditure, higher is the expectancy rate. And India is placed over here. Similarly, using the data, they also show that increasing public spending on health has negative correlation with maternal mortality rate. Higher the public spending on health, lower will be the mortality rate. Next up for discussion are two news articles, one on page number 8 and another one on page number 4. Hurriyat may face wrath of UAPA or Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and pro-Pak slogans NSA invoked against 4. So these two acts, National Security Act and UAPA, are often used by the executive and they remain in news throughout the year. And so it is important for us to at least know about the provisions and issues with the law. And we'll start with UAPA. As far as the genesis of the act goes, it was introduced in 1966 for curbing the cession of a part of a territory of India or its secession, or which questions or disclaims the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So you can say that this law was enacted to protect the integrity of our country. In 2004 and 2008, the act has been amended to be modeled as an anti-terror law. Then recently in 2019, Parliament cleared the amendment bill to empower the government to designate individuals as terrorists on certain grounds provided in the act. So before the 2019 amendment, only the organizations could be labeled as terrorist organizations but not the individuals. But later on, need was felt to designate the individuals, a person, as a terrorist as well, and so the amendment was carried out to enable that labeling. Now it has come into news recently because of death of Father Stan Swami, who was a tribal rights activist. He died while he was in judicial custody, and he was under judicial custody because of UAPA was applied on him. Now what are the issues with the law? Why is it always the target of human rights activists who claim that this is a very brutal law? Now first and foremost, it is considered antithetical to the constitutional freedom to dissent, rule of law and fair trial. Its frequent application is also one of the biggest problems. Between 2016 and 19, NCRB data suggests that a total of 4,231 FIRs were filed under various sections of UAPA, of which 112 cases have resulted in convictions. So you can understand how freely it is applied by the government. So more often than not, it is used as a tool in hand of government to suppress the dissent. 4,000 organizations and groups are not trying to secede away from our country, but still the FIRs have been launched in so many cases. Then another problem is section 43D of the Act, under which bail cannot be granted to a suspect if the court is of the opinion that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the charges are prima facie true, which then results in cases like Stan Swami, in which under trial waits for bail for many years to come. Now the Act has been designed and modeled to curb the terrorist activities. But the definition of terrorist acts or activities is very ambiguous, which includes the death of or injuries to any person, damage to any property. Now, if an act results in death, it might not be a result of a terrorist activity. And this also differs from the definition of internationally accepted definition of terrorism by United Nations. And so in this regard, recently the judgment of Delhi High Court assumed significance as the judgment granted the bail to 3 activists who were charged under the UAPA and had been in jail for over a year without trial, and they were in jail because of their alleged role in 2020 Delhi riots. Now it is time for government to think about reforming this law, taking clue from this judgment. Reforming the law in a way that it aligns itself with the constitutional freedom guaranteed by the Constitution of India. So this was UAPA. The next act from another news is National Security Act, which is a preventive detention law which has been created as per Article 22, Clause 3 of the Constitution of India, that allows for preventive detention and restriction on personal liberty for reasons of state security and public order. NSA empowers the center or state government to detain a person to prevent him or her from acting in any manner prejudicial to national security. The government can also detain a person to prevent him or her from disrupting public order or for maintenance of supplies and services essential to community. The maximum period for which one may be detained is of 12 months, but the term can be extended if the government finds fresh evidence. Just like UAPA, it also has its own set of issues. The first and foremost being lack of record of detentions under NSA. NCRB or National Crime Records Bureau, which collects and analyzes crime data in the country, does not include cases under NSA in its data. Hence, no figures are available for the exact number of detentions under NSA. Then, of course, just like the law on sedition, the law on UAPA, NSA is often misused. It is used often as an extrajudicial power in the hands of executive. So, for example, the case because of which we are taking up NSA in the DNS is the case where the police invoked the NSA against 4 persons out of 10 arrested so far for raising pro-Pakistan slogans during Muharram event in Ujjain. And of course, a lot of people think that this is not the correct way to deal with sloganeering because NSA is quite a harsh law. Then the application of NSA takes away all the basic rights. Right to be informed of the reason for the arrest and to be produced before a court within 24 hours of arrest. A person detained under NSA could be kept in the dark about the reasons for his arrest for up to 5 days and in exceptional circumstances not later than 10 days. Then as far as right to consult to be defended by a legal practitioner of choice is concerned, the arrested person is also not entitled to these rights simply because it has been enacted utilizing the provisions of Article 22, Clause 3, which provides for these exceptions. So although the law is constitutionally valid, but its application, like many other laws, raises a lot of moral questions. Do let us know in the comment section what we can do to deal with the issues with NSA and UAPA. Let us now move on to the next news. Next news appears on page number 1. Afghan 6 Hindus among 392 airlifted from Kabul. And this article talks about a very special plane, C17 Globemaster, which is manufactured by Boeing company, uplifting a lot of Indians and Afghans from the Kabul. And from the perspective of prelims examination, this is a very, very important news. Because in the past, UPSC has asked about a lot of military equipments and their specifications. And so in this regard, it is a large military aircraft that was developed for the US Air Force. It has been developed by US company Boeing. C-17 can carry large equipment, supplies and troops directly to small airfields in very harsh terrain anywhere in the world. It is a very long haul aircraft and it has been designed, as you can see in the image, to carry oversized payloads and especially in unpredictable situations. So what are its special capabilities? It can take off from very high altitude airfields. It has air refueling capability and it can land in paved or even unpaved airfield either during the day or even during the night. And so that is why this is a very, very special plane. India has acquired a lot of C-17 Globemasters to quickly airlift not just the people but also machineries to troubled areas, for example Ladakh. Then this next news, India signs deal for 70,000 assault rifles, appears on page number 10. And it talks about 2 equipments, AK-203 rifles and KAMOV 226 helicopters or utility helicopters, which India has intended to buy from Russia. And there has been a long delay in the acquisition. So as far as AK-203 is concerned, it is an assault rifle that India is importing from Russia. And it is based on the same platform Kalashnikov, which is the same platform for AK-47 rifles as well, and it is expected to replace Indian small arms system or INSAS assault rifle. The main characteristic of this system is its reliability, durability and easy maintenance. As of now, India plans to import around 70,000 of these units. India has already signed deal with Russia for setting up of a manufacturing plant at Korwa Defense Factory in UP. And specifically for this purpose, a joint venture was established between India and Russia named as Indo-Russian Rifles Private Limited. But since there is a long delay in the joint venture for indigenous manufacturing, India as of now has decided to go ahead with direct import of these AK-203 rifles. Then the next is KAMOV KA 226 helicopters or utility helicopters, which are very small twin-engine Russian utility helicopters, which are very special in the sense that they have interchangeable mission pods. Rather than a conventional cabin, allowing the use for various accommodation or equipment configurations. So as you can see in the image, this is the helicopter, which is very different from a traditional helicopter. And the best part is that you can plug in your own pod. So if India wants to use them for extinguishing fire, you can just put a water tank over here. If you want to transport people, you can attach a cabin over here. And so that is where the specialty of this helicopter lies. India has signed a deal with Russia to import these helicopters, but India has suggested a lot of changes in these helicopters, especially in avionics, on which the Russia is working right now.